First time this season, the two presidential candidates squared off on issues of foreign policy and homeland security last night, with both sides making the argument on the war on terror and the invasion of Iraq.
Iraq was not even close to the center of the war on terror before the president invaded it.
My opponent wants you to forget is that he voted to authorize the use of force and now says it's the wrong war at the wrong time at the wrong place.
And despite the debate's strict rules and limitations, President Bush and Senator Kerry were able to land some verbal blows.
The only thing consistent about my opponent's position is that he's been inconsistent.
I've had one position, one consistent position, that Saddam Hussein was a threat. There was a right way to disarm him and a wrong way, and the president chose the wrong way.
So did either man walk away a clear winner, and did the viewer get a clear sense of the candidates' messages? Joining me now to discuss this is George Farah, executive director of a group called Open Debates and the author of a book called No Debate. Big critic of this so-called debate. Yes. Going into it, you said you expected to be disappointed. Were you?
Last night was certainly informative, and it was a relieving break from the smear attack ads we've seen during much of the election cycle, and there were certainly some engaging moments, but the American people deserve better. As David Broder advocated in the Washington Post yesterday, it would have been nice to have an initial debate that included some third-party challengers who had a voice that was far more critical of the Iraq war. It would have been also, more importantly, it would have been nice to have a format that was engaging and challenging and forced the candidates to quickly think on their feet rather than recite a bunch of sound bites.
I have to tell you, being familiar with your arguments about this presentation, my expectations were lowered substantially going into it, but I thought that there was able to be some repartee because there were some rules that were broken. Was I wrong?
Jim Laird did a remarkable job with the format restrictions of encouraging more back and forth, and he should certainly be applauded for it, and the network should also be applauded for having camera shots that showed both candidates on stage at the same time, rebuking the demands of the Republican Democratic nominees. But Jim Laird had one follow-up question. There were no rebuttals. The candidates could not question each other, so they were allowed, rather than having to think on the moment, to recite some more and more sound bites. There's no question it was the most important forum for the education of the American voter thus far, but we can do better. Debates 30 years ago had rebuttals and surrebuttals, more back and forth follow-up questions, and they're far superior than what we have now.
Why has it been changed? The League of Women Voters used to run this. Now it's the Presidential Commission on Debates.
Well, the Republican Democratic parties hijacked the presidential debates from the League of Women Voters in 1987, and ever since, the Republican Democratic nominees have assembled a team of high-profile lawyers who have drafted very complex contracts that exclude third-party challengers, that exclude engaging formats, that exclude spontaneity, and essentially suck out some of the debate from the debates. So last night could have been a better clash. Instead, we had a half of a clash.
You know, it seems to me one of the missing pieces here is the media. You applauded the media, including our own network, which repeatedly took cutaway shots. Yes. Of the opponent listening in to the challenger or the president's responses. Has the media been forceful enough to say, we want more, the American people deserves more?
No, frankly. The media sponsored the first 1960 presidential debate between Kennedy and Nixon. It was a marvelous affair. The entire contract was a single page, and it broke all viewership records for the medium. The networks have leverage. These debates aren't broadcast to tens of millions of voters unless the networks choose to broadcast them. So they can demand of the candidates to have a better format, to question each other and challenge each other, and to include whatever independent voices there may be that the American people want to see. 57% of the American people want to see additional voices.
George, you've been getting plenty of airtime, more than the candidates perhaps in the last week. Do you find that the American people, one, are sympathetic, want more, and do you think, it's too late in this season, but do you think that in 2008 that there will be differences?
Absolutely. We're already moving ahead. The contract the candidates negotiated has been made public for the first time in 16 years, and that's partially due to the work we've accomplished. There's going to be 4 moderators, not just Jim Laird, but 4 moderators for the 4 different debates. That hasn't happened since 1992, also a consequence of our work, so we're very proud of that. But certainly we're moving ahead. This is not a left-wing, right-wing, or centrist issue. The American people value their presidential debates. They miss the way the League of Women Voters used to fight on behalf of the public interest for more engaging and inclusive formats, and I'm confident we'll eventually win. These guys are not our gods. They're running to be our public servants. We can exert pressure on them.
Quickly, what should we expect next week? We have the vice presidential candidates squaring off, and then we have Friday's debate.
I think we're going to find the format to be even more restrictive. Last night we have 5 subject matters, so the format wasn't as relevant because they had so much time to discuss the issues. But with dozens of domestic policy issues, the formats are going to reduce most responses to 60 seconds, and that's going to be disappointing to many voters.
George Farah, Executive Director of Open Debates, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization looking out for American voters. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.